Imagine, if you will, this morning, you're on an expedition looking for a sunken pirate ship in the Caribbean Sea and believed to have been sunk in the early 1700s. Now, your sonar picks up a vague form on the ocean bottom that's roughly the same length and the same width as a ship from that era. You send divers down there, and they retrieve a cannon that is consistent from that era. It looks pretty good. So they retrieve a couple of other artifacts, all possibly from the early 1700s. Then, in the middle of these skeletal remains of this ship, they find a small chest. So they bring this chest up, and you excitedly open it up, and it reveals some coins in there. Okay, this is looking really good. Until you come across a coin that has the date 1901 stamped on the bottom, and your heart just sinks. Well, why does your heart sink? Because no matter how many evidences appear to show a 1700s date, that one coin, 1901, overrides all the other evidences. There is no possible way for that ship to have been sunk before 1901. That one little bitty piece of evidence proves that. Just keep that in mind for the rest of the talk, and we'll get back to this here in a little bit. But in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, I'm going to read verses 3 through 12. Paul says, "Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Do you not remember that while I was still with you, I was telling you these things? And you know what restrains him now, so that in time he will be revealed. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, only he who now restrains will do so till he's taken out of the way. Then that lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That is, the one whose coming is in accord with the activity of Satan, with all power and signs and false wonders, and with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love of the truth so as to be saved." And here's the point I want to look at this morning. "For this reason, God will send upon them a deluding influence so that they will believe what is false, in order that they all may be judged who did not believe the truth, but took pleasure in wickedness." So Paul here is predicting this great apostasy, this great falling away within the church that would come sometime in the future. But Paul then makes this odd statement that God would send a deluding influence to those that did not receive the love of the truth and took pleasure in wickedness. Some people have a bit of trouble with this, but I think it's simply saying that for those who do not want to believe God's word, who do not want to believe this truth, God allows them to have another belief system. He allows them another post to hitch their pony to. He says, you don't like the truth? You don't like what I've said to you? Okay, go ahead, believe something else. Throughout history, there has always been this dual paradigm where you have the truth and God's word, and then you have a belief system that people can go to. In Israel, they had the law, and then they also had Baal and all these other false gods that were throughout the area. So there's always been an alternative to the truth of the one true God. Different false gods, astrology, pantheism, all-out atheism. There is always a popular alternative to the truth. In Matthew 24:24, Christ warned of false Christ and false prophets that they would arise to mislead, if possible, the elect, the saved. So Christ was warning us that Christians are in danger of being misled, that we can be drawn into deluding influences. Now, in the early 1800s, our modern theory of evolution really began to gain popularity. It had popped up before historically at different times and different places, although the textbooks will tell you that it began as men got smarter and technology got better and we had all these discoveries. But the theory of evolution in some form or fashion has been around for quite a long time. It popped up in Greek philosophy, other places and times. It's even found in ancient Sumer. The oldest written records had sentences devoted to a primal seed that everybody came from. So evolution never really was about science. It has always been about worldviews, about philosophies. Modern evolution started to gain steam at a time when many European countries were looking to overthrow their monarchies. If there was no creator, there was no divine right for a lineage of kings. No one had a right to a throne. So this ushered in a terrible political and worldly philosophy, humanism. Humanism, quite simply, believes that there is nothing higher than humans, that nothing divine, that mankind can progress and improve on his own, that our fate is in our hands and that we are the end all, the highest pinnacle of creation. Existence, because in that belief there is no creation. So this paved the way for some really, really terrible things. Communism, godless socialism, fascism, etc. In the 19th century alone, you can account for up to 100 million deaths to these types of belief systems, of governments murdering or starving their own citizens, or the wars that were fought to stop the expansion of these things. 100 million deaths. If you care to turn to Matthew chapter 7 with me. Matthew chapter 7. If you want to read along, we'll be reading 15 through 20. Christ here says, Matthew 7, 15 through 20, "Beware of the false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce bad fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. So then you will know them by their fruits." 1 million deaths a year strike me as some pretty bad fruit from that tree. Yet, as this belief in evolution took hold, as it was established in universities all over the world, as those who controlled the hallways to wealth and power began to enforce absolute adherence to this philosophical belief of theirs, to this religion of evolution, the Christian world began to seek ways to compromise with this bad tree, to accept some of that bad fruit, to say, well, we can eat this fruit, yeah, that's bad fruit, but we can eat this fruit that comes from it. So they began to say that the Bible really meant something different than what it says. That days of creation were really long, long time periods, or that there were long gaps in between these days of millions and millions of years. They tried to merge this belief system with the Bible, yet the phrases in Genesis chapter 1, there was evening, there was morning, a first day. There was evening, a morning, a second day. The way it's structured, the way it's written, precludes any possibility of these beliefs being true. When God gave Moses the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, verse 11, he gives the reason for their honoring the Sabbath. "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day." God wrote this in stone with his own finger, that all of creation was accomplished in 6 days. If the earth is billions of years old, God the Father was mistaken. Speaking on divorce in Mark chapter 10, verse 6, Jesus said that God made us male and female from the beginning of creation. If the earth is billions of years old and we started out as single-cell asexual organisms, then God the Son was mistaken. When the authors of the New Testament epistles reference Genesis, creation accounts, and the flood, etc., if evolution is true, then the Holy Spirit was mistaken. Since the 1960s, there's been a huge decline in church attendance. And one of the main reasons given for people who leave the church or leave faith altogether is evolutionary beliefs. 1960s was when, after Russia first beat us into space with Sputnik, America kind of panicked. So they said, we got to get as smart as them in science. We got to put evolution in our grade schools and our junior highs and our high schools. So we began forcing evolution more and more into the curriculum and began indoctrinating our youth with evolution. But there's trouble with this. If you believe in evolution, well, a lot of people say, why even bother about this? It's kind of uncomfortable. It's not a salvation matter. But the thing is, to say that God created us through evolution, to say that evolution is true, there are some pretty serious contradictions that you have to ignore between it and the Bible. This is just a few examples, but there's at least 50 of them. Evolution tells us that Earth began molten in the beginning, this hot molten mass. The Bible tells us the earth began as a cool entity with water, liquid water on the surface of it. Evolution tells us there were insects before flowering plants, and there were water animals before plants. But the Bible tells us there were plants before insects and plants before water animals. The evolution tells us that the sun came before the earth. The Bible tells us the earth came before the sun. Evolution tells us the early atmosphere was poisonous, was ammonia, and some other toxic things. And the reason they say this is because if there was oxygen in the early atmosphere, that clings to amino acids, these types of things. The elements you need, I can't think of the word right now, but the element you need for life, every living cell needs, oxygen grabs onto those things and tears them up pretty bad. So early atmosphere, for evolution, you cannot have oxygen in it. Yet every single layer of rock that they look at, they find evidence of oxidation. This is one of the things they know, but they ignore, but it's the truth. But anyway, evolution tells us the early atmosphere was poisonous. The Bible tells us the early atmosphere, and we'll talk about this here in a second, was really good, that it was great. It supported life. Evolution tells us that man came from monkey. The Bible tells us that man came from the dirt of the ground. Evolution says early man were very primitive, but the Bible tells us early men are capable of building great things, of agriculture, of metallurgy, of all these things. And all the ancient civilizations of humankind shows a really neat degree of complexity. We still don't know how they did the pyramids, but there were things that predate those that they still scratch their heads over. So archaeology doesn't really show us this primitive gradual incline. It shows great advances and then declines, advances and declines. It's not like an upward scale, it's just a walk on a beach or waves on a beach going back and forth. Now these are just a few of the contradictions. There are many, many more that I'm not going to go into. I could talk for an hour on these things. Remember that coin, 1901. Most dating methods rely on unprovable assumptions that these elements have decayed at the exact same rate and had the exact same saturation starting from the beginning. Now, if any of you have ever started a fish tank, you know you don't just pour some tap water into an aquarium and throw some fish in there. It doesn't work, right? What you have to do is you have to pour water in there. You have to dechlorinate it. Either give it so many days for the chlorine to dissipate, or they have stuff that will take the chlorine right out of it. You have to heat the water up to a consistent or level temperature depending on what kind of fish you have, whether they're tropical or plain old goldfish or so. But you have to let the water age and get a little bacteria built up into it because the fish need these things to survive. So the water has to be mature for the fish to survive. God did not create the world and the universe with a false appearance of age. He created a mature creation to support life. Plus, there are known problems with dating methods that they just ignore, even though they know it's true. Radiocarbon is one of the favorite dating methods, even though it's only good till, they say, not a million years is too old. And we'll get to this in a minute because, you know, the decay rate, it's all gone. But radiocarbon is created when radiation from the sun hits nitrogen in the upper atmosphere, and it creates a radioactive carbon dioxide. Plants take in this radioactive carbon dioxide, animals eat the plants, and it goes throughout the food chain, so every living thing on the planet, including you and me, take in radiocarbon. We have radioactive carbon in our bodies. Now, if that is constant, the amount of radiocarbon in the atmosphere is constant, if it stays the same, when a person dies, they stop taking in radiocarbon. That radiocarbon starts to decay, so you can tell how old when it died by how much radiocarbon is left in the remains that you have. And it works really good if their amount is constant in the atmosphere. The trouble is, they know that it's not. Radiocarbon concentrations are increasing in the atmosphere and have been every time they've measured it. So what this tells us is, the farther back you go, the farther false age you're going to get. It's going to look older and older and older, percentage-wise. The rates of decay in all the dating methods are influenced by different factors as well. Heat, electromagnetism, etc. The Earth's electromagnetic field, they say, is right now less than 70% of what it was at the time of Christ. It has varied over the years. Rates of decay, if there was a global flood, that would contaminate everything. Most methods will not agree with each other when they test something. You know, radiocarbon, they have, you know, all these different ones. So if you use every one of these methods to date a certain object, a certain bone, you're going to get a different date from every method you use to do it, because none of them are reliable. So how do they know which one to use? They keep the one that comes closest to supporting their theory. That's the way it goes. Radiocarbon should not be found in anything older than 1 million years, and they admit this. Yet radiocarbon has been found in coal beds, it's been found in dinosaur fossils, it has even been found in diamonds. And diamonds are supposed to be way older, but they have carbon, these radiocarbon in them. Do a little Google search on that. There's some really interesting articles on it. Back in 2005, I had a conversation about evolution with my sister, who was really into molecular biology and the impossible complexity you find in the simplest of cells. And she said that the day would come when evolutionists would have to admit, if not creation, at least design. They would have to admit, this is design, there's no way this could have just happened. But I told her they wouldn't admit evolution was wrong if a T-Rex came out of a Congo jungle and bit someone in the backside. And a few days later, interesting enough, a T-Rex did come out of the lab and bite everybody in the backside. They found soft tissue in the femur of a T-Rex. And this soft tissue had blood veins that when they dissolved the minerals around them, it still had some elasticity. You could still stretch this thing. Supposedly 65 million years old, soft tissue. At first they tried to debunk it, claimed contamination, had to be outside contamination from the lab, or something died and you know, decomposed on top of it or something. But DNA tests proved that it was a dinosaur. It wasn't like living things that we have today. Since then, they've started finding it everywhere. Everywhere they look. What they thought was a remarkable, incredible exception to the rule is now becoming the rule. And not just 65 million years old. Duck-billed dinosaurs, fossils from 120 million years old. They found soft tissue in it. They have found fish slime dried up from over 100 million years old. They have found squid ink powdered up and dry, but still powdered there, squid ink from 400 million years old. They have found living bacteria in amber, supposed to be 120 million years old. They found living bacteria, supposed to be 250 million years old, in salt flats. And if you like, just Google list of dinosaur, or list of ancient tissue in fossils, something like that. One of those Google, something like that, will get you to it. But these are peer-reviewed articles. These aren't some crackpots saying, you know, I found Noah's Ark. These are peer-reviewed scientific articles agreed upon by the evolutionists. There's been a few proposals that, oh, the iron must have acted as a preservative, although 200-300 million years, iron's supposed to oxidize. Or they say that maybe these bones were toasted before that they could start to decompose. Most of them don't show any signs of extreme heat or toasting. They're just, you know, scrambling for something. 400 million years of preservation. They find these coins stamped 1901 everywhere. Now, to me, there are some questions I have, that I can't answer, that I don't understand. I think one of their best arguments is starlight reaching us from distant galaxies. That's hard to explain. How can we see something that's 10 million or 100 million light years away, 10 million light years away, if the Earth isn't 10 million years old? And that question is difficult unless the speed of light isn't constant, unless God sped it up for us to see. But even this evidence creates problems from that side as well, for that side. When they look into deep space, they claim they are looking back in time, millions and millions of years. Yet, everywhere they look in the universe, whether they're looking this way, whether they're looking that way, whether they're looking 10 million years, 100 million years, however far back they're looking in time, they see spiral galaxies. Galaxies with warp, spiral arm. They all seem to have the same age, the same maturity. They don't appear younger in other parts of the galaxy. They've identified stars that they admit, according to their theory, have to be older than the universe. The line we are given in textbooks, the lines we are given on Discovery Channel, the lines you read on the Yahoo headlines declare these evidence as fact. Yet within each discipline, within each thing that they say, this is the missing link, there are arguments raging. Once you get past the academic level into the people in the field, not the people teaching our college kids, once you get past that level, you see there is no great agreement. There is no hand-in-hand, this is fact, we all believe this. So why do so many people believe in it? Why do they cling to it? They don't have a love of the truth. And they can be very convincing to those of us who do have a love of the truth. But people will cling to anything to avoid the truth that they are sinful, fallen, created beings that are facing judgment. They want to be able to have relations with whoever they want. They want to, acquire whatever they want, however they want. They don't want to face the consequences of these beliefs. Next week in our Sunday morning class, we'll get to 2 Peter, who says he predicted that this would happen, that there would come a time when people would say, where is the promise of his coming? For ever since the fathers fell asleep, everything goes on as it always has been. That is uniformitarianism. That is the evolutionary belief in a nutshell. And he says they forget that the earth was formed in and out of water and was destroyed by water. They don't believe the flood. They don't believe in it. One last little thing I find really interesting, and maybe you won't, but one of my favorite fossils, and probably my favorite fossils, are trilobites. Me and my daughters go hunting a lot, and I have tons of rock in our garage and around the house. Poor Nancy. But we find something good, we get something not as good and throw it away. I'll clean it out one day. But my favorite fossils are trilobites, and we've only found 2 of them. Trilobites appear suddenly, abruptly in the fossil record. And they tell us in the Cambrian, the earliest fossil-bearing strata, and they tell us that these are very primitive early creatures. They have the most complex eye system ever found in nature. The design of their eye is just incredibly complex, more so than ours. But the really interesting thing I find about trilobites, they find their fossilized foot tracks about 50 million years before they start finding fossilized trilobites. This is also true with sauropods. The big brontosaurus guys, what we used to call brontosaurus when we were kids, they find their footprints millions of years before they find their fossils. Why is this? Because like Peter said, they forgot that the world was destroyed by a flood. These rushing floodwaters came over. These things were scampered to escape. The mud buried the footprints first, pushed them over, and then buried them later. That's why you see this appearance of graduation of, things going from one to another. Things were buried according to their body mass, to their geographic location, where they lived in shallow ocean, deep ocean, land, wherever they lived. Things were buried at different levels, and then they were sorted by the waves of the flood for those days when the water covered the entire earth. God gives us 2 paradigms. We can believe the truth of his word, or we can believe something else, a diluting influence. We have two options. So again, this may not be a salvation issue, but I say that there are some things to really consider when we look at what the Bible Genesis account says and what secular scientists say.